Thank you, Mr. President. So I'd like to start with an introductions, of the topics that we have at hand today. And to be loyal to the theme of the Congress, I'm going to kick in with what is the visions of the President for 2035 as far as oil and gas is concerned. So it lies down to very simple two key sentences. The first one is to sustain the oil productions of Cameroon. Today, we produce about 90,000 barrels of oil per day. And the second one is to increase the gas productions. And we're producing very little today, and we have a huge potential, which is compared to our resource level. I believe our reserve in gas is about 135 billion cubic meters. But now, when it comes to oil, our reserve is 200 million barrels of oil. What does reserve mean? Reserve means is the amount of oil we can withdraw from the earth economically. Okay, so today, this reserve is based on the average cost it takes to actually produce this amount of oil. And so there is a cost factor which is based in the reserve, right? So if you bring in a very expensive method of taking this oil out of the well, therefore it reduces your amount of level of reserve. If you can reduce the cost, it increases it. So now, if you make the math, 200 million barrels of oil, 90,000 barrel per day productions, that gives you 6 years of productions. So which means that by 2035, we'll have no more oil left. So how can we get there? Is it possible? Obviously, it is possible. We're going to talk a little bit about that. If you being in Texas, you probably, when you drive around, you can see wells producing, in the farm. Some of these wells are owned by farmers. They produce about 50 barrels oil per day. This is really nothing. In Cameroon, if your well doesn't produce 300 barrels per day or something, it's not economical. All right? So, and again, the 90,000 barrel oil per day that we produce, we actually use about half of it, internal consumptions. And the remaining of these productions constitute about 1/3 of the government income. So you could see that our situation as far as oil is concerned is very, very fragile. If tomorrow we don't have that government income, it's going to impact the lives of Cameroonians. But worst, if we're very successful in implementing the 2035 strategy visions, well, we're going to dry up that gap very quickly because we need more oil, to grow our businesses. So this is actually a hindrance to the government growth, and it could be a cause of social unrest. So it's actually very critical that we take this objective very seriously. But the thing is, in today's environment, living the status quo that we have today, it's pretty much impossible to achieve this objective. So really, what I want to talk here is solutions. What can we do? And that's why, we do have some key players here, like Mr. Brice Asopjio, who's actually creating, I believe, the first oil service companies in Cameroon. And we have Boris Okong, who's also an example of how you can actually develop talents and build capacity. When I did this analysis myself, I figured out rather than staying there and complaining, when you talked about oil men in Cameroon or oil women in Cameroon, I'm one of them. I've been in the industry for 30 years. I've been into countries where we start from scratch and we brought productions to the country. So I cannot be sitting on the sideline and just pointing figures and saying, well, Cameroon is not doing anything, or the government come out with a strategy which cannot be implemented. So I really want to get dirty. And myself, I talked earlier that I have an institution. It's actually a private university. And I thought, well, the first thing to do in this case is to build a local capacity in such a way that we can actually produce oil at much cheaper cost, and therefore increasing the reserve that we have and produce oil longer. And we created this year a curriculum in petroleum engineering, which is to really help build those local capacity, because Mr. Brice here, opening his company, he's actually, believe it or not, he's having a lot of demand, for services, but he cannot afford to pay the $1,500 to $2,500 per day that, engineers and technicians charge in the oil industry today, for the services. So he needs to have engineer at a cost that he can manage. And that's why, we think that with what we're actually putting in place, we can actually help, to bring the cost down and maybe have more businessmen like Brice in Cameroon. So this is just the introductions of the situations. I think that in the end, I will let Brice talk about some of the challenges that he's facing, putting his company in Cameroon, and some of the policies that the government probably need to put in place, to make his company flourish, because it's actually for the good of Cameroon. And we can also draw from the example of country who's been there, who've been conscious about these dangers, and who actually implemented some policies about local content to help, local businesses flourishes in the oil and gas. Because it seems like it's mystery. It requires a lot of capitals for sure, but with the right policy, we have seen that Nigeria has developed a lot of entrepreneurs in every single aspect of the oil and gas. And I think this country is actually ready to see a local, we're already seeing, local oil producers in Nigeria. We see Nigerians going where expatriate cannot go. And we see that they actually managed to reduce their production costs. And I think that Nigeria being next door and with the capacity that they have, they will produce oil forever.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for that introduction. I would turn to Mr. Brice Asopjio. As Mr. Chairman mentioned, he's probably the leading Cameroon oil man. He's the first Cameroonian who is going solo in the oil and gas industry in a very big endeavor. And I'll have you, Mr. Asopjio, can you tell us a little bit about your company and your experience so far?
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Dennis. And I would like, first of all, to thank the CPS to giving me this opportunity to, share the experience that we grabbed along our career with our compatriots. So, just a small background about Malega. Malega Energy Service is an oil and gas service company owned by Cameroonians that we put in place 2 years ago. And the idea came from the fact that we believe we have in the sub-region a big potential, a considerable potential of oil. Of course, unfortunately, Cameroon is the smallest reserve we have in the area. So if you look at Chad, Gabon, Congo, Equatorial Guinea, their reserve is about 1 billion of barrels a day, and then we only own 200 million. So in terms of gas, Cameroon is taking the first position in the sub-region with, as the chairman said, around more than 135 billion cubic meter of reserve. So this means what? This means you have an opportunity to develop oil service company within the region. And then because there is a market, there is a big market. So the question comes, why do we always allow export company to come and do what we have potentiality, capability to do. Why do we not try to do something that we always left order to do? So that's why the idea comes, and then, we created this oil service company. Somebody just mentioned the administration procedure. We went through all these steps on the right way, and I will be honest with you guys, I did not really found a big showstopper during the process. So this just means things are getting better in Cameroon. Things are getting better in Cameroon. But it's not all. This company, oil sector, as you guys know, is something very, very complicated. I mean, very, very, what can I say? It's very, it allows people to open a big eyes to see what's going on around. It's something that everybody has to dig deeper to see what is inside. And then some of the time, it's not just easy to have, services or whatever. So, but we still believe that with the support of the government, we can make things happen. If we really want to follow the vision 2035 that was put in place by the head of state, saying that 2035 Cameroon should be an emerging country, for us to get there, company like MAES, Malega Energy, must have the strong support of the government. Why? Because you have to create the condition in the country that will allow company like all the PME, what call in French the PME, that will allow all these companies to step up. The local content, as the chairman just mentioned, is one of the most important aspects of this. What do you mean by local content? In the oil industry, from the exploration to the production, there are a lot of small aspects that have to be, we have to go through. From research, from, seismic, drilling, completion, production. So there are a lot of discipline. Some of this discipline doesn't need to be done by, this big, large or exported company. Some small company, like what we've created, are able to handle all this. And for them to handle all this, it has to be a kind of, a local content implementation from the government, saying that, for instance, this type of a job can only be done by local company. It's something that is done already in Angola, where I am, Nigeria doing that. So why Cameroon cannot do that as well? So this is one of the key factors. And the chairman just mentioned, if we start doing that, our production costs will decrease. Why should I fly somebody from Philippines to come and run the crane operator? Now tell me, why should I fly somebody to come and run the crane when I can train somebody in 1 week in Cameroon to run the same crane at a low cost? So this is the local content issue that the government, and then I'm glad somebody from the government is here.
It's different.
This is something that can really be implemented to allow companies like us, like MAES, to change or to help the government achieve the vision of 2030. And we will not achieve that vision if we don't take this kind of aspect very seriously. It's valid for Cameroon, for Chad, for Central Africa, for Congo, to Gabon, all these companies. And it's a good thing that CEMAC is trying to release the way of doing business, so that if you are based in Cameroon, probably you should be able to target Chad. If you're only targeting Cameroon, I will not have MAES based in Cameroon. But because this situation is trying to get open, we believe that we got to be able to do some job, some intervention in this foreign economy. We're currently operating a little bit in Angola. We have some contract. We're about to have some contract with Chad government, even with Cameroon government. So there is a lot of opportunity in this oil sector business that can actually be implemented in Cameroon.
So,
So, Mr. President, let me just make a quick follow-up on what Mr. Asopjio just said. He said some very important points there, which is regional integrations. You cannot build a strong industry without having Nigeria on your side, and Chad and Equatorial Guinea. And to make this happen and to really develop that industry, if the government is really serious about it, we need to build this critical mass of talents that I mentioned earlier, therefore, and institutions to develop these talents. We need also to build businessmen, because today, Total or ExxonMobil, they're not going to come to Cameroon if the potential is only 200 million barrels. But for Cameroonians, having that business, which can generate a net income of $500,000 a year, it's a good business. And he will be employing many other peoples. So having the right technical skill is important. We will also need different kinds of investors. The investor who probably looking at different kinds of returns. And we also need to have, as he was talking earlier, some very favorable law, and local content being the most important ones. And obviously, we need to develop a lot of entrepreneurship and a whole host of local industry, entrepreneurs in that oil and gas industry. So I just wanted to make those points.
Yeah, great point. And I'll get Boris. You've been with Schlumberger, Cameroon, Angola, Louisiana. What has been your experience, and what have you learned that you think Cameroonians back in Cameroon, or some of the folks here who are maybe not directly engineers, people with MBAs who are looking to get into this industry, what would be your advice for them? And how do you think companies like MAES can move forward in what they're trying to do?
Okay, thank you very much, Dennis. So before I tackle your question, I want to give a few statistics just to help us understand two important points that have been made. The first is about the cost of doing business in the oil industry. So a small rig, the rigs are, let's call it ships. A rig is like a ship that drills a well, okay? A small rig costs about $50,000 a day. So that's to give you perspective as far as this industry. It's a very capital intensive industry. So that just galvanizes the point that to be able to enter an industry like that, you must have the market. So what Brice is doing and what Gabriel talked about, integrating the region, is very critical. The second statistic I want to give is, we've said it twice already, that the typical production is about 200 million Cameroon's reserve. I want you to compare 200 million with 2,000 million in Gabon and 37,000 million in Nigeria. So that tells you our limitation has, some people say, oh, we have our oil, nothing is happening. We don't really have oil if you compare us with Gabon, and nothing at all if you compare us with Nigeria. So that brings the point which Gabriel said, to be able to enter the industry, we need to look at the region. You can't just say, I'm focusing on Cameroon, because the market is not there and it just costs too much to do that type of business. Okay, now let me address Dennis' question, which is a very good question. So typically the oil industry, those who are hired have a science background. Not necessarily engineering, although that's the preferred background. I mean, engineering, anything mechanical, electrical, chemical, all of that counts. But as well, even those, for example, I did chemistry in the University of Boya. So my background is sciences, but I've still been able to have a career within the oil industry. So most of the opportunity is related to STEM. So it comes back to what we've been talking about, sciences, mathematics, engineering. In addition to that, though, we have a lot, and this is more recent, we've had quite some focus on bringing business people in the industry. So we as engineers and scientists have a problem with that, but the reality is increasingly the industry is seeing the value of bringing people who have a business background to manage the business. So there's a lot of opportunity right now to come in as an MBA, for example, and begin at a managerial level. And so you basically don't go to the risks, all what we've gone through 8 years going there, you come right into the top. So there's a lot of opportunity, and the industry is booming right now.
Yeah, like the chairman, I think he made a smart choice 30 years ago. MBA straight to management. Yeah. Regarding the fact that we always think about oil and think of Cameroon and our budget, our GDP, and we keep ascribing the fact that we have a lot of money. You guys are discounting that. Can you all talk a little bit about oil and Dutch disease in Cameroon? Like, how is the fact that we think we have oil maybe negatively affected our other sectors that could have been developed?
So it's very funny. In reality, you could make the parallel and say we might have a little bit of this Dutch disease, and the fact that everybody talked about oil in Cameroon and don't really have the numbers. But I think that one thing that play or that make us behave that way is just the weight of the oil revenue in the national income. It's huge. It's I think 30% is huge, but the true reality is because the other sectors of the economies are weak. It's not because we have too much oil. 90,000 barrels per day is nothing. 200 million barrels of reserve, just to put that in perspective. This is the amount of reserves that Angola has, and they're giving it away to their populations and to play with. They want to develop Angolan oil companies, oil operating companies. So the state has 200 million barrels of oil reserve, and if you qualify to the criteria, they give you a parcel to play with, and they give it to you for free, right? So and they will even build the infrastructure to help this guy to produce. So that's really nothing. So when you talk about oil disease, I look at it, Bakassi, we talk every time about Bakassi, there's a go in world Bakassi. What is the reserve in Bakassi? Nothing. We drill wells there. There's not proven reserve in Bakassi. So, but in the people mind, they think we have a huge potential there. It's not even worth fighting for.
That...
If I can, the good thing is, at least on the gas side, okay, we can claim we have something because we're ranking number 6 in African countries in the gas side, 135 billion, something. So I think the good focus will be, to direct our energy mostly on that side, which is drilling gas oil, producing gas oil, building LNGs in Cameroon to create more energy and boosting the economy. But in terms of oil, I would say seriously, there's nothing in Cameroon.
Well, that unfortunately, almost makes me want to have a heart attack. But because you're telling me that our other sectors are weak, really weak, and you're telling me that the oil is going to run out real quickly. So how are we going to do this 2025 thing that we're talking about?
Well, this is exactly what I was saying. I said the game plan is to develop a local industry. If we develop a local industry, therefore, this 200 million barrels of oil that we're talking about may be multiplied by 2. It will reduce the extraction costs by half, right? So the $200 million become 400 million barrels. So I was talking about six years, that become 12. Right? So now we also have to develop local businessmen, local businessmen. People like Brice. We need to have more of them. We need, because Brice is mostly focused on drilling and productions. We need to have explorationists, those who are actually going to find oil. Today, there is actually some potential to find oil in some aspect of in some geographical places in Cameroon. But if you a foreign investor, it's very evident that when you do your very quick analysis, the amount of oil that may be produced there is very slim, so you don't go there. But if I'm a local Cameroonian business, well, it may be profitable. And that's why I'm saying we need to develop this local capacity, because when we have this local capacity, all of a sudden it's open all sort of opportunities. What we're saying is not an all, we're not a big oil country. Yes, we're not. I'm not even sure we're ever going to be, because when you look at the geology of Cameroon, many experts say the likelihood to find a giant oil reserve there is very slim. So it means that we really need to manage what we have very smartly, and we can only do that with a strong engagement of the governments by building this local capacity.
So Boris, come back to you. To your knowledge, do you know of a focus by the government to engage people in this arena, Cameroonians in this arena, maybe through a focus through education, through research, sponsoring people to have specific talents in this area to see? Because if our other sectors are not going to step up to the plate, and we are still going to be depending on oil for 10 years, or the way we are trying to, in our economic milieu now, still focus a lot on oil revenues. The government, in my mind, should be making sure that in the next 10 years we could have some real good people who have real knowledge from their home base. Do you?
Okay, so let me answer that this way. I'm not aware of any particular program that the government has to sort of encourage people who want to work in this industry, but in that light, I want to make a point. Generally, the quality of engineers we produce, it's outstanding as far as the oil and gas industry is concerned. When we compete with our peers, for example, in technical training and stuff like that, you find that the quality of the guys from Polytechnic and the quality of the guys from the engineering school in Gaoundere competes anywhere in the world. So even though I'm not aware of any particular focus on training people, generally the type of mechanical and chemical engineers we produce are of a good enough standard to be able to compete anywhere. And that is why if you go to Houston, for example, any major oil company you go into, you'll find Cameroonians at the upper level of management, just because we are able to compete almost at the same level with our American compatriots or those who have been trained from other schools. So we have the intellectual training required. I just don't know if there's a particular focus on that.
I know people are burning to ask questions, so I'll open it up for a few questions. All right, Mr. Calvin here.
I just want to ask you a question. You say that you don't have enough oil reserve. Is it already established? Are there still possibility that they can find? Because I heard that in the northern part of Cameroon, there is a possibility also to have some kind of oil reserve in the continuation of what is happening in the Chad pipeline. Some experts will say that it's not possible to have reserve in Chad and not have also reserve in Cameroon and Central Africa. The second question that I want to ask is regarding the petrochemical opportunities in Cameroon. Normally, if you have oil, you should be able to transform oil. How would you evaluate the possibility to create an industry of transformation of oil locally in Cameroon?
Yes, when I talked about reserve, there is actually a scientific way to decide what is reserve and what is not. You declare it, you have to find oil and drill and then test it to make the evaluations. But before you even get there, you do have some geological studies that give you the potential of what you can actually find in the ground before you even drill your first well. And that's what I was talking about. I was saying that, well, yes, you do have some potential, like in the northern part of Cameroon, in the Chad basins, in the up north. You have some potential when you look at the, like when you do the basin analysis in the eastern part close to the Chad borders. These are what we call potential. But these potential are obviously not big enough, because if they were actually very attractive, A company like ExxonMobil or Total will already drill there. As a matter of fact, they actually held permit in those places for many years and they never did anything. Right? So it's just because, when they do their economics, they see, well, is it really worth spending the money? No. And it comes back to what I was saying earlier. If we do have Cameroonians who have the know-how to do that, it might not be interesting for the Totals and the ExxonMobil, but it might be interesting for the Cameroonians. And again, Boris said it, it's a capital-intensive industry. But if a Cameroonian goes there, he's the one buying the capital. He needs to have the backers. That's what I was saying. You need a different kind of investor who are actually going to finance these kind of projects. When it comes to the know-how, the kinds of people who can actually go there and become those businessmen, we are actually at a very privileged positions. When you look at the West Coast, except of maybe Nigerians, we do have very talented people working in the oil and gas industry and people with a lot of experience who know how to do this. But there is not, I would say, a national impetus which will push them to actually do that. I have a friend of mine, he's been working in the oil industry for 30 years. General managers, he's run companies. And now what he's doing, he's gathering dust. He took his retirement and he's gathering dust in Douala. When I look at him, I said, this is a waste. Because if he was in Angola, for example, where the state put national content very highly, he would be approached by the state to say, I want you to help set up something, a national oil company or something, a local private oil company or something, and give him the support to make it happen. So now when you talked about petrochemicals companies who can actually do some, yes, I think it's all possible. Today you do have technologies which can be deployed at much smaller scale. And I'm talking about smaller scale because when it comes to petrotechnical, again, it's massive capital investments, very complicated. But today there are technology. You can go and set up a small gas to liquids conversions there. You transform your gas into liquids. You have small production units, but it's something that if we have to do this, somebody else will have to go and see, what are the technologies that I can use to develop petrochemicals business in Cameroon. Start small, maybe with a small unit, and maybe expand into very complex and giant unit like you see here in the US and in Europe.
We have a question back there.
Yes, so it's a little nuance in what you said about comparing Cameroon oil potential with Nigeria and Gabon. I think on Cameroon, Nigeria, you have to be careful in per capita terms. Nigeria has large volume, but in per capita terms might not be that good compared to Cameroon. Now, but you may be right in comparing Cameroon with Gabon, where the oil cycle, we are almost at the same level of the oil cycle, the saturating stage, where it's only new technologies that can actually extend the oil horizon. Then the last question, my final question is something probably out of my ignorance. Do you know of any country in the world which previously had oil but doesn't have it anymore?
Say it again.
Say it again.
Any country in the world which had oil deposits, rich oil deposits, but is today without oil, doesn't have any oil anymore?
Okay. Let me give you an example. We have Equatorial Guinea. I can't think of the bad of a country which had and does not have, but we can look at the Equatorial Guinea model and see how their production has drastically dropped. If you look a few years back, it was in the area, Equatorial Guinea was the Angola, where they were producing, and everybody, all of us were trying to get a way to go and work in Equatorial Guinea. Right now, I went to the base, the Schlumberger facility there, I want to say 3 years ago. It was like a ghost land. We just had 1 or 2 people to keep maintenance in the base. So there is a real need to manage reserves, because you can be very big today, and if that is not managed properly, in a few years you'll just become a very small producer. But as far as a country that had and does not have at all, I can't think of one of the top.
I will just add on something on what Boris says. On the same way, talking about Equatorial Guinea, it has been proved that if there's no more reserve found, they may have a very, very low production, even lower than Cameroon. They move from 300,000 barrels to 175,000 barrels right now. In Chad, in October 2002, when they opened the first gate, it was 200,000 barrels flowing through the pipeline. Now it's 160,000 barrels. So it's very important. There's a possibility for those oil producer countries, if you don't have new reserve, you don't manage your reservoir, you end up by having no oil one day. So it's possible.
So, I mean, just to expand on what he said, I mean, you can look at South Africa as well. Production nearly went down to zero. I think there was also a country, I believe Senegal, they had gas and it went pretty much down to zero. So you do have example, you know, I don't have the record in top of my head, but you know, it's very easy to find out. To answer your other questions where you were saying, yes, you cannot compare Cameroon with Nigeria, I agree with you. Or Angola, right? I mean, these guys are drilling in deep water offshore, you know, a rig costs $500,000 a day. But in a sense, you can also compare because I'm trying to compare within those countries what I can actually compare. For example, in Angola, I was talking about the work in land, the $200 million I was talking about. That's similar cases as in Cameroon. In Nigeria, you have the deep offshore, but you also have the swamp, which is within the reach of national, and then you also have the land work, which is within the reach of national. As a matter of fact, a friend of mine just opened a company to work in the land. You know, he actually very successful now because he's going into places where Shell couldn't go. You know, he knows how to deal with the villagers and all the rest of it. You know, Shell couldn't. So, you know, these are within our reach, and that's what I'm talking about.
Mr. Calvin.
I'm going to draw from a talk yesterday by Dr. Julius Akpo that in the Samak region, most of the money that comes from mineral resources like oil and gas, while it is important to talk about internal capacity building through job creation, but there's also a stereotype that most of the money that comes from oil and gas actually is for profit making for these companies. The government doesn't actually feed back that money into the system through loans to private companies and for internal capacity building in the general population. So where does the oil and gas money go when it comes to government?
Funds your budget.
Okay, I'll try to give you an answer to that question. But you're going to be surprised. Most of our government do not really know exactly what they are producing. Serious. They do not really know. And then this comes to what the chairman was saying, that he has a friend who just retired from the oil field. He's sitting home in Douala. The government cannot ask him to come and help and put in place some and implement some kind of rule that will help better understand the oil industry. Most of the government, as I'm telling you, does not even know how much they are producing. We are currently, what I say we by company, we're about to finish with Gabon, installing the counters, the government counters in all the pipeline that can allow them to know what is their production. Because now they are only relying on what the oil operator company are telling them. It may be true, it may not be true, who knows? So it's the same case in Chad, we are currently working in Chad to get there. We engage the discussion with Cameroon government, but the truth is that most of them do not even know how much they are producing. Now, what are they doing with the money? Quote unquote, I cannot really give you that.
So let me comment on that as well. So Brice just mentioned a very strong point. You have the technical points, which is oil is being produced, and maybe the governments, either voluntary or involuntary, hasn't put in place a system to make sure that he is getting its fair share. But when it comes to the money, where does the money go? It's easy. Most of the contracts that government have with oil producers are posted on the website. And believe it or not, early on, Cameroon was very, very smart. They had one of the best contracts in all the West Africa coast, even better contract than Nigeria. We were getting 83% of the total income from the oil was going to our government. We did have very smart people who crafted a perfect contract. Everybody was saying, Cameroon, I remember I did a free consultancy for the government in Ivory Coast, right? They were getting barely 40%. And I told them, this is rubbish. I don't know who wrote your contract. So they actually learned from our contracts. And since then, because all the government is talking to each other, so the contract between the governments and the operators is actually in favor of the government. So when you read the contracts, the money goes to the government. Now, after the government, that's another issue. But it means it's really go to our countries. What we do about it is our problems. It's our problem, but it's not the problems of these multinational companies. The kind of money and income they make from those contracts, you can also find about it in the website. Just Google, go to the yearly statement. This clearly states, we make X amount of million in Nigeria, our revenue. So you look at those margins, they are not outraging. I mean, this is, well, you're in that business, you want to make this money for the amount of risk you're taking.
Right here, please. Oh, okay. Go ahead. And next question.
Yeah, I think the panel seemed to be very optimistic about the future of the oil industry. I don't think I am. And that is basically because of the proliferation of alternative sources. How do you think these alternative sources are going to impact the oil and gas industry in the future?
What are alternative sources in Cameroon?
To be honest, the alternative sources is peanuts. I mean, you can go to the web and you can find it. I believe the alternative sources, when you put all that together today, it might be around 15%. When you do the projection over the next 20 years, it maybe go from 15% to 17%. So we're still going to be in oil and gas for a very long time. I would say at least the next 30 years, I'm not even worried about that. Because, I mean, let's face it, the energy consumption is increasing, especially in Asian countries. It's increasing exponentially in China, in India, and all developing nations are actually increasing their consumption. Even in Cameroon, we achieve the 2035 visions, we will be using more energy. So yes, alternative energy is going to increase, but you're still going to need more oil. So they're all increasing together.
One question.
I'm Christine Osei. I'm an urban planner by trade, and have a question which leans on environmental cleanup. What is the record for Cameroon and other African countries you mentioned? Because even in the US, the fraction with frac that has to do with gas extraction is still a problem in the US. And I wonder what is the case for Cameroon with the gas. If we lose oil, we may be producing more gas. What is the environmental record for Cameroon and other African countries?
Boris,
Yeah, so again, I don't have the statistics, but you bring up a very good point. Historically, the African continent we've not really been environmentally driven. I mean, in a related industry, there are cases of debris, waste being shipped from Europe back to Africa. So we are ways behind on the environmental. But when you look at the advantage, global warming is a reality, okay? But there is the necessity to have energy for development. So it's a two-sided coin. We want to protect the environment, but we also need energy to be able to develop. So we don't really have, as far as I'm aware, we don't really have an environmental consciousness like what it's here in the US. And I believe with time, it's going to come in, but you're always going to have that challenge of trying to match the balances of the necessity to produce energy and the environmental impact of that. So we try to find a balance of producing more environmentally friendly ways of producing energy.
So let me add on that. There are actually many things being done. What he said is right. Every company will always want to fight for the balance. But in Africa, and many producing countries, they have actually adopted very stringent law. These laws sometimes are even more stringent than what you find here in the United States and in Europe. For example, in Angola, you have what they call zero discharge laws, right? So you cannot discharge anything in the water in Angola, which has, I think, 0.5% of toxic products. So you have to clean it up, neutralize it, and dispose it in a landfill. In Cameroon, by the way, you can be sentenced to jail if you are a businessman and you pollute the environment. Obviously, the problem might be in the enforcement, right? So, in Nigeria and Angola, you have also the zero flaring, so you're not allowed to flare any gas outside, right? So now when it comes to fracking, do we have any special law on fracking? I would say not to my knowledge. But I also think that all the vibe around, all this discussion about fracking is overstated. We were fracking in the industry 30 years ago. It's just because now we're doing it on a massive scale on the gas well in the shale gas that people are waking up. It's not new. I started as a fracking engineer 30 years ago. So it's not new. Is the risk real? I don't know. Being in the fracking industry, designing the job and doing it myself, yes, I realize that if you frack it in the scale that we're doing it here in the US, it might be a problem. But I would say the minor fracking, especially the type we do in Africa today, we don't have shale gas there. So the fracking is what I would call normal. I don't think is a threat if it's done properly.
Question at the front here, Mr. Christian.
I think you already addressed part of it. I was going to ask about this whole deal about shale oil and so forth. Being in Ohio, it's such a big deal there. And I've always wondered, what does that mean for Cameroon? Does it have an impact? I'm not an expert on it, but I understand it's supposed to be a special technology that makes it easier to extract oil in certain areas. Do you see, especially with the production cost being so high in Cameroon, can that help, or in Africa overall?
So the thing is, we have to find the kind of reserve that you need to frack, which is shale oil or shale gas. To my knowledge, in Cameroon today, we don't have those kind of reserves. So we don't need to frack on that scale. And I was talking earlier about enforcement. And that's the problem that we have in Africa. You can have a very nice law, but you don't have people to follow up and enforce. And most of the time, the people who are living the nuisance of maybe the pollutions don't know how to fight for their rights. And that's the problem. Here in the US, you go, maybe the frack's not done properly. The frack is a technology, When I was in school, they learned me how to frack. The first thing they tell me is how I should protect water zone, prevent, gas to leak from the surface. So you take that into consideration when you do your design. You test it. There is a procedure you follow. Obviously, if nobody challenges you, you can take some shortcuts.
Well, go ahead. As we segue to our next panel, which will be on the Cameroon economy, I can't help but ask you one question. With our revenues from oil dwindling, where will their money come to grow the economy?
So, look, there are many areas where we can grow the economy, right? I mean, just looking as an observer and a traveler, Cameroon, by its geographical positions, is so well positioned. That's the center of Africa. What is the number one problem in Africa today when you talk to businessmen? Logistic. Why are we not having an air hub in Douala? We will make tons of money. That will create huge employment. Okay, thank God, the Port Anoprophone is coming into fruition. But, we should have had this project many years ago. That would have created a whole new industry. So oil is not the only answer. My main concern about the oil is not necessarily on the revenue front, is on the expense front. If tomorrow we are in a position where we actually have to find hard currency to buy oil and gas, it's going to be even more hindering to our economy than the revenue that we're getting today. And that's, when I was talking about what we can do to prevent this from happening, is to attacking that expense front rather than the revenue front, which I think is going to drive at some point.
Gentlemen, I think, ladies and gentlemen, we have a lot more questions, but we don't have the time. This has been an excellent panel. Please, let's show our support and approval.